A good Monday afternoon to you. Evan and Tiki on the Fan, an incredibly busy show. The real reason why Bill Belichick contacted the New York Jets. We'll get to it coming up.
Did he actually do that?
Well, you'll hear my theory, and I think you'll buy it. Trust me.
Nice.
We'll get into what happened with that Jet game yesterday. They actually won a game. Aaron Rodgers looks amazing. The fan base wants him back. We'll continue to count down the most memorable moments in New York sports from the year, 24 and 24. And a lot of bizarre things happened in the NFL. So very, very busy show. We'll get to all of it. But I think what we're witnessing right now is how tanking and maintaining your coach and GM is an impossible tango. Because as I sat there and watched Tiki Barber, along with McCourty and Catalan and A.J. Ross call that game, and as I listened to 75% of the stadium being loud Raven fans, and as I watched Lamar Jackson hold up his pants as he was juking around giant defenders, as I watched Tommy DeVito, poor Tommy DeVito, get concussed, and as we watched another plane go over MetLife Stadium and another non-competitive slop, it is becoming very difficult to say, yeah, they should bring back Brian Daboll and Joe Shane. Like, you watched that game. You called it.
Yeah.
Like, isn't this becoming almost an impossible thing to actually say with conviction?
What makes it so hard, though, Evan, is that you look at the circumstances that they go into that game with. And Dane Belton is your starting safety. You got some kid Stroman off the street. I mean, I looked at his transaction log. Mm-hmm. It was like 2 pages long. Practice squad, cut, release, practice squad, signed, activated, deactivated, cut, injury, blah, 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 blah. And he's your starting cornerback, right? There were names that I had not ever heard playing meaningful snaps for the Giants. And so when Lamar Jackson, gives a drop back and then rolls out to his right and Rashad Bateman's wide open, am I shocked? Of course I'm not. Like it's the level of competition that they can't even hope to live up to when you're playing a team as good and a player as great as Lamar Jackson. By the way, why people aren't talking about him in the MVP, I have no idea. It's Josh Allen's award right now. BS.
Well, Lamar hasn't beaten literally every stat. So I'm with you on that.
And he's unbelievable to watch. But my point back to the Giants is you just look at the roster and against teams like the Baltimore Ravens or some of these other good teams that they've gotten their doors blown off on, it's inevitable. Yeah, that's going. That to me, that's not coaching. That's just your roster's not good enough.
I don't think anyone in their right mind, other than Tommy Lugauer, who believes in the Tommy DeVito tree, I don't think anyone in their right mind went into Sunday expecting to win. I don't even know if a lot of people thought it would be competitive. And everything you laid out is true. How would you have expected anything different? But it still doesn't take away from the fact that this is a football team that hasn't won a game in 2.5 months. That this is a football team that while Joe Shane bragged, hey, at least we're competitive, and at times they've been. Last week against the Saints they were. On Sunday they weren't.
Well, I mean,
and if this ends at 2-15, and it is going to end at 2-15, it is a lock and a half that they're not winning another game.
I don't know, maybe Indy.
I mean, as a fan, when you watch this slop, it's tough to believe. Well, it's tough to believe in the coach or the general manager.
You're right, but it's different, and I see it from a different perspective. So the last time that the Giants lost 9 games in a row, it was over 2 seasons. We brought this up briefly on the broadcast, and it led to a larger discussion about the Giants and my thoughts on them. But the last time this happened, it was in 2003 into 2004, and that was Jim Fossil's last season. Giant fans will remember how that all went down. He basically got fired. And are they still trying to perfect their craft despite the negativity surrounding this team? And if the answer is yes, and that tells you something. But it's when the product looks that bad, it's hard not to do anything but say fire everybody.
Well, and also, here's the other reason. they're going to finish 2-15. And you want to tell me they're going to beat the Indianapolis Colts in a few weeks?
No, I said maybe.
Maybe. Okay, it's the NFL. I guess you never know. So now we're talking 3-14. No matter how you cut this, we are staring at a historically bad season in the history of the New York Football Giants.
Yes.
That's what we're looking at. We're looking at a bad season. And if you look at the NFL over the last half a decade, nobody survives seasons like this when they've been here for 3 years.
Yeah.
You survive it when it's year one and you're Dan Campbell or you're Zach Taylor, but when it's year three.
I don't know. So go back to that Jim Fossil year. And it was his 7th season. And the difference between that season that I was a part of and this one, which I've watched and talked about all season long here on WFAN, and I've called a couple of their games, is that in 2003, Ernie Accorsi had wanted to get rid of Jim Fossil for years. I mean, it was almost like he was just waiting for it to happen. And as soon as the opportunity presented itself, he's like, all right, that's it. You're out. We're going to go get somebody that I really want. Because you remember Ernie got handed the general manager job after Jim Fossil got hired. Right? George Young retires, and after his great career with the New York Giants, Ernie takes over. Jim is not the coach he hired. Jim was a coach he inherited. Mm-hmm. And so every couple of years, it was like, all right, Jim's on the hot seat again. Jim's on the hot seat again. So, like, the opportunity presented itself in 2003. They moved on from Jim. And it was great. It worked out for the Giants. They won 2 Super Bowls with Tom Coughlin. I don't feel like this organization is just waiting to get rid of Brian Daboll.
No, I think it's the opposite.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
So when people ask, well, is he done? Look at the record. They're going to finish 2-15. As you're saying, he's out. They're gone. I don't think that that's the desire. I think the desire is actually the opposite. They want to find reasons to keep him.
Right.
And they're waiting for that to show itself on Sundays. But back to my very first point, when the roster is made up of guys like Greg Stroman and Art Green, who you don't know. Mm-hmm. You've never seen them play. Like, I've never seen them. I can't even find them on tape because they haven't played at all. It gets impossible to judge the coach off of the product.
Well, what about the GM then?
I mean,
I got to blame somebody. Giant fans have to be blaming somebody for this, for that roster yesterday and for the inevitable 2-15 season. Right. So if you're telling me, look, it's impossible to coach this team, which is fair to say. It's not impossible to coach
this team. It's impossible to play well against good opponents.
Okay, fair enough. Who do you blame for the roster being this bad? And that's the impossibility of the situation the Giants are in right now. Like, you talk about Jim Fossil. Here's one of the differences. I think when you look back to the 2003 Giant team that won 4 games, they were a few years removed from going to a Super Bowl.
And the year before, we were in the wild card game.
Right.
You know, we had a great team then.
Absolutely.
The year before, we had a great team. We just screwed it up in the wild card game.
Absolutely. And so I could see Giant fans, and I remember Giant fans calling up this radio station saying, I want to keep Jim Fossil. And then another group of Giant fans, because this is how we are as New York sports fans, get rid of him. As I sit here right now, and I am trying to be an IFO when I view this Giant situation, I don't have the emotional attachment Sean Luggie and you have, but it is getting more difficult by the day to defend running it back when you see this. And I'll tell you something else, and I want to use your words on this. Do you remember weeks ago when they made the decision to bench Daniel Jones and start Tommy DeVito?
Yeah.
One of the reasons you gave was, you got to give Giant fans a reason to go to the stadium. Remember saying that?
Right.
Here's what I'm afraid, John. You're going to try to tell your loyal fans, just trust them. I know it's been a rough couple of years, but just trust them.
I don't think so. I think you're digging too deep into this, because driving into that stadium yesterday, there was a ton of Ravens fans.
Oh, we could hear it.
Ton. It's an easy train ride. It's an easy drive if you wanted to do it. And so there was and by the way, there was a ton of stars there as well. Now, part of that was because you're going to watch Lamar.
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to go to one game this year for the Giants, go watch Lamar Jackson.
Box office.
And he put on a show, because that's what Lamar does. But, like, when I was driving in, I went really early. I was there about 8:45, 9 o'clock. There are Giant fans that are out there tailgating. It's freezing. And it's I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing here? Got these massive fires going. They're throwing the ball around with the kids, right? Giant fans are going to go to the games. And especially when a new season starts, it's not about believing in the coach. It's about going to a Giant game.
Sure.
Right? That's the bottom. It's different than I think some of these apathetic fan bases, say like in Arizona or wherever, where if they stink, nobody's coming, period. Giant fans are going to come. I think the message, and this is what's going to be most important after the season, and how it's presented about the plan is so critical for this team, for this organization. And it's so critical for Joe Shane, and it's so critical for Brian Daboll. Because if they don't have a plan, then why keep them? And so we won't be privy to this, but this is what's going to have to be communicated to John Tisch, or John Mara. The Tisches are involved in different ways, but you know what I mean. This is what's going to have to be communicated to John Mara as he tries to make this decision about whether or not to keep this crew together.
I do agree with one thing you said earlier. He wants to keep this crew. And I get why there's an appeal towards that. It's the same reason 6 weeks ago when we talked about this, I wanted to keep them too. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't want to be turning over general managers and coaches every 2-3 years. But the one thing I warned 6 weeks ago, and now I'm feeling it as a human being watching football, is how difficult it's going to be to believe in an administration when things get this bad. Because it's that bad. And I know that the sunshine at the end of the rainbow is, 2-15, we got the number 1 overall pick. And I get the excitement from that. Like, you're better off having the number 1 pick than, let's say, the 8th or 9th pick. Hello, New York Jets. I get it. But I also think that when you watch this every Sunday, and this coach has no answers after games, and this general manager isn't speaking, hasn't spoken since the bye. And remember, he told us, hey, we're in close games. We're competitive. Yesterday was not competitive.
No, that's not actually true. Against good teams, they get their doors blown off of them.
Right. Well, but
they get beat up.
That's who you play, though. You play some good teams. You play some bad teams.
Right.
That's the NFL. And the Baltimore Ravens, I agree with you, are a very good team. They play the Philadelphia Eagles to end the season. What do you think is going to happen if the Eagles are playing for something? They're a pretty damn good team, as much as we all hate them. They're probably going to blow their doors off. So it becomes very difficult week in and week out to watch this as a Giant fan and say, yes, bring him back. This is all to perfection. We're going to get the number 1 pick, and I believe in Dave's. You're a tankish, Sean.
Yeah.
When you sat there yesterday, and I know a part of you was happy because you're on your way to the number 1 overall pick or the number 2 overall pick.
More than a part of me. The whole part of me is every ounce of me is happy.
And your confidence level in this administration remains the same?
Wait, well, confidence that they'll be retained or confidence in them?
Forget if they're going to be retained. Okay. That's up to one owner or maybe him and his family. I'm talking about you as a Giant fan.
I want to make this very clear. If you sit there and make the argument why specifically Joe Shane should no longer be employed based on roster building, I can't fight that completely. I see it. I see the first 2 drafts didn't build a foundation. Mm-hmm. The truth for me is I still lean towards, I do want them back. I do want them back.
And you lean towards it, though. Which means you're kind of beat up a little bit.
No, because here's the truth, Evan.
Which, by the way, makes a lot of sense.
Evan, the problem is on a very surface level when you just have the argument about whether you want Joe Shane or Brian Daboll to stay or go, that's all fine and dandy. I got to do the same thing we've been doing from the show to begin with. And then what? If you promised me from the bottom of your heart that Mike Vrabel was going to end up being the coach of the Giants, sure. Then I could say, you know what? I could get behind this. But the truth is, and this is not a fault of Mr. Mara, but it just shows you the last couple of games, I don't trust the next hiring process. If we went through the whole Dave Gettleman era and 2 head coaches, and now we went through this is the best I've seen of those 3, even if this end result isn't great. If you dump out of this after 3 years, and then you really go through the true process of hiring a GM and coach, that is going to take 2 to 3 weeks to find a GM, and for that GM to find a right head coach, another 2 weeks. Do I want, with this team holding, Abel's job to me is over, and nothing about yesterday changed the good or the bad on that.
He's right. I mean, the roster's not good enough against good teams. They get blown out by good. Tampa's a good team, by the way, despite their slump in the middle of the season.
Oh, headed to the playoffs, it appears.
Right, they got blown out. The Philadelphia Eagles are a good team. They got blown out. The Minnesota Vikings, they're a good team. They got blown out. The Seahawks, a good team, they beat. So, they can compete with the Washingtons and the Cowboys and the Browns and the Saints and not the Steelers really, but I'm trying to think of these other teams that they played. That's all slipping to the top of my head. But they're an average team, and they're only going to win games when they get a better quarterback play and continue to develop some of these young teams or young kids. Now, the other thing of this is, and I'm biased here. Mm-hmm. I like Brian Daboll. I think he's a good coach. Well, I know he's a good coach because he won Coach of the Year a few years ago. I know what his attitude is like. I know how he treats his players and how they respond to him and what they say about him, not in these public, I got to say the right thing moments, but in the private moments, what they're saying about him. And he comes to work with the same enthusiasm that he did at the beginning of the year. And it's not like I feel like when I think about Ben McAdoo, who I always felt was overhired. Right? He didn't feel like a head coach to me. Pat Shurmur, we know what that story was. And Joe Judge, he was a jerk. And so you could feel like the dislike of him. And plus the circumstances of hiring a new general manager when Dave Gettleman retired, it would have been faulty logic to hire a new GM like Ernie Accorsi and ladle him with a head coach. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you can explain all of them, the previous regimes. But I think starting anew is not something that I'm eager to do. And I know that the fan base will say, well, just fire him because you gotta punish failure. Fire the guy. But it's like low-hanging fruit. It's like the easy answer. It's like the easy out. When a team doesn't have success, just fire everybody. Like the stupid plane. And the dude's doing interviews because he's a publicity whore. Like, who cares? like I'm going to spend whatever thousands of dollars to fly a plane just so I can do an interview about it? Yeah, look at me. Like, what are you doing? Right? To me, that's nonsense. It has no impact. I don't think it means something like it did in the 70s, right? Today, we have social media, people. If you want to post something, post it, right? And if it's good enough, it'll go viral, and you'll get your point across. You don't need to waste money to go put an airplane up in the air.
You know
to me, that's stupid to me.
Well, the other thing is, because I got to be fair about this, I think that the other owner in this town pays too close attention to this stuff. And that's been one of my biggest criticisms of Woody Johnson, and we've heard this in published reports, he checks Twitter. Yeah. Well, that's a mistake. And remember, there was a plane overhead from Woody Johnson about a decade ago concerning John Idzik. And I remember saying this to Benigno on the air a decade ago. I'll say it again. If you want to fire John Idzik because he's an incompetent head coach, you should.
Right, not because someone flies a plane.
Right, and so it's the same message for John Mara. I bring up earlier about ticket sales. That shouldn't be why you hire or fire somebody. Mm-hmm. So if you're the owner of this team and you're John Mara, you don't want to be Woody Johnson. You don't want to decide to fire your general manager or head coach because of a plane.
Right.
You don't want to do it because you think ticket sales are going to go down. That's not the reason to do it. The reason you do it is because you look into their eyes and you ask them, how come you've gone backwards 3 straight years?
Yeah, and
it's a good question. And if they can't give you a satisfying answer, then they're gone.
And by the way, we talked about this weeks ago. Ticket sales are not a determining factor of the success of you. Want to talk about when it comes to business, every team in the NFL is winning. They're all making money, right? So get that nonsense out of your mind. Every team in the NFL is winning. How does it translate on the field? And then when you win on the field, it really becomes a cash cow, right? So that's what you focus on, is how do you get the product to be one that is enjoyable and successful, and one that people are going to want to gravitate towards.
What you've got to do, and you don't have to do it because you could just kind of go right through it, is somehow Giant fans have to believe, hey, their best avenue to winning is keeping this head coach and keeping this general manager.
Well, there's another part of this, though, Evan, and this is very important for everybody to realize if you want to fire these guys, and you can understand. We all understand now the draft is coming in April, right? This isn't like last year. There are 2 guys who are going to be selected at the top of this draft at quarterback. 2, not 5, 2. The Giants will get one of those 2 guys. And whether it's Joe Shane making that pick or a new general manager that will be under immense pressure to make sure he gets his team's quarterback right, making that pick, the likelihood is either GM results in the same person playing quarterback for the Giants next year. And guess what? Whether that quarterback is good or bad will determine the future job of either Joe Shane or the next GM. So, if the same GM is going to pick the same guy Joe Shane picks, and he's a failure.
That's a terrible reason.
No, it's not.
That's a terrible reason.
No, it's not. Because in 2 years,
it's an interesting argument.
Because in 2 years, guess what you're doing? You're going to change regimes again if that guy's a failure.
I get that. Look, who you pick at quarterback and that quarterback developing is a major part of a successful and failed GM.
Who do you want to develop that quarterback is the question. And so as we think about this decision that the Maras are facing and the Tisches, Sean's right. Whoever the GM is taking a quarterback.
Yeah.
With the one or 2 picks.
I say that with about 99.8% confidence,
right.
certainty.
Exactly.
Yes.
So forget the picker, forget the general manager at this point. Who do you want developing that quarterback? That's the question you have to ask.
Yeah, what's very difficult, and I admit this as an IFO watching this independently, is every week this becomes more difficult. Now, Loogie, you've been ready to fire these guys since week 5, so I assume your opinion remains the same 9 weeks later.
It does, and Sean's arguments only strengthen it. All I'm hearing is Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone. That's what I heard. I heard we don't want to fire anybody for the sake of firing because we fired a bunch of people, and we're going to... Let's talk about...
It's a bad analogy, though, because the Yankees are always in the postseason.
What was Joe Shane's crowning move in the offseason? Brian Burns. Has that worked out really well? Not really.
Yesterday,
Not really. Not a game changer.
Yesterday, Ronnie Stanley gave up a sack for the first time all year.
All right, you gave up 2 picks and a lot of money for Brian Burns. He has not been a game changer. He hasn't. And if you go through the drafts, it's not like Joe Shane has developed this great team. Okay, they were strapped with the quarterback situation. By the way, the quarterback that they chose to bring back. And I just don't think this roster is ready. I know you want to bring up Washington, like they'll snap their fingers and they'll get the magic elixir and everything will be fine. It's the guy that's drafting him and developing him. I don't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Giant fans feel that way. We'll hear from you, 888-808-1019.